Well, hey, I welcome you very warmly. I am, of course, Dawid, and today we'll take a look at his or her last thoughts about you. So we'll see what's in her head, in his head, and we'll see, of course, how this translates to your relationship and what conclusions, so to speak, they're drawing from these thoughts. So I warmly invite you to this spread. I hope that here we'll delve quite thoroughly into this person's thoughts and we'll check how it currently looks. Um, each card in this spread is different, has its own message, so I recommend staying until the end, or at least seeing which cards appeared, so as not to skip this entire spread, because sometimes someone leaves early and misses some part that might be very important. So let's see then what his or her current thoughts are. More like recent ones, meaning today, let's say, from yesterday, from the day before yesterday. So especially if you had any conversations, a meeting, this will definitely relate mainly to that. But if not, then also basically, because if, for example, there's silence, there's no contact, well, then also in such a situation, these thoughts can appear. So let's see. Queen of Wands in the first position, meaning a card that, above all, says that you're such a dominant part or dominant space in his head. This thought is not quiet or neutral. He thinks of you as a woman who has energy, magnetism, agency, meaning in his head, you're someone who doesn't ask for attention, but naturally attracts it. This is not a safe thought. This is a thought about someone who could enter and rearrange his life, disrupt his control, or awaken something that has been dormant for a long time. Even if he distances himself, in this thought, there is awareness of your strength. There's also admiration here, though tinged with tension, meaning somewhere in there, he sees you as someone confident, aware of your worth, perhaps not even fully available. So somewhere he kind of notices that this contact with you is somewhat underlaid by your distance or, precisely, unavailability, as if he felt that, you don't reply right away or don't reach out on your own initiative as often, and he might perceive this as your unavailability, but that really, a whole host of other possibilities. At the same time, the Queen of Wands is a thought about attractiveness, not just physical, but energetic. So he might be returning to your way of being, tone of voice, reactions, that spark which, of course, you have. So this is a living, recurring thought, sometimes even distracting him. This isn't nostalgia, but active stimulation. Something in you lights up his mind, even if he tries to extinguish it. So this sounds quite interesting because it shows that, regardless of what kind of contact you currently have, either way you are that kind of distracting thought, a thought that, as it happens, is very strong. And even if he's at work, if he's doing something there, calculating something in Excel or clicking on the computer or, I don't know, anything else, this thought still appears here. So this is quite a strong thought, not just anything. So, this particularly fits someone who indeed had some meeting, some message that stuck strongly in their mind, let's say, and the whole time somewhere there a bit, let's say the whole time in that mind somewhere there, it's stirring, right? That's what I'd call it. So, let's see where this thought actually came from. Because as I said earlier, I assume it's about some such moment, whether a message or a meeting that happened between you. But let's see what the cards say about this. Well, this card speaks very clearly. He tried to somehow understand you logically before he allowed any feelings. The King of Swords is someone who observes, analyzes, draws conclusions, often from a distance. So the thought of you as this Queen of Wands didn't arise from impulse or fantasy, but from carefully watching you. He read you, your reactions, boundaries, the way you speak, what you don't say. And that's precisely why this thought is so strong. So it's not some projection, but more like a conclusion. So this would fit quite well with what I assumed earlier, that it's about some kind of observation based on messages, a meeting that might have been between you. At the same time, this card shows strong control mechanisms, meaning he doesn't allow himself to fully feel this thought, but locks it in his head. The king is silent. And let's say he's silent, but also if he does speak, he says something like, I understand, but I'm not getting involved. So he knows you're a woman with strong energy, but instead of moving closer to it, he tries to rationally come to terms with it, set it in frames, name it. That's why he might behave or seem cold or distant, even though these thoughts are quite intense. So this really comes through strongly here. and I'm actually curious how this looks in practice. But indeed, in his thoughts, there's quite strong energy despite everything. Well, we also have a queen and a king, so it looks quite interesting, right? But I'm curious how this looks in terms of compatibility, so to speak, or in conversations, because if we were to interpret these cards as such mini symbols of both of you, where you're the woman and he's the man, well, in that case, these symbols are a bit different, though, aren't they? Well, because maces are fire, and swords are obviously logic and quite a bit of coldness, so yeah, it would look interesting in reality, I'd say. Although, well, according to some beliefs, they say that opposites attract, though with that, it varies. In any case, it looks quite interesting. Let's look at position 3. In that case, and here, to complete this first part of this spread, I would like to ask a question: what's blocking him? And here, or rather maybe a different way to put it, the question is whether this thought is blocking him or preparing a decision. And this card shows a thought that seems to have hit a wall. So thinking about you, he comes to the conclusion that something has already happened in his head and it can't be undone, meaning this isn't light sadness or temporary discouragement. It's an approach like, well, mentally it's already too much. As if he told himself, let's see, this is beyond me. There's no movement here anymore. If I go further, something in me will fall apart. So this blockade doesn't stem from a lack of feelings, but from a sense that perhaps there's no way to bear this currently in the present state. So it's like something really quite practically blocking these energies, right? So I don't know what could be happening. This is of course quite difficult to say, but here something is happening that makes this relationship somewhat blocked. Because we do have this King of Swords in the middle, which symbolically indicates precisely such a transition or that barrier between these two energies, which are essentially different, right? We have the fiery Queen of Wands, who wants to act, wants emotions, wants something more. And this obviously isn't just about you, but also about his energy that's somewhere in him, but also the Ten of Swords, which shows such, well, an ending, but also exhaustion, fatigue. Yes, we have a figure who is lying down, barely breathing, so this shows that something is happening there, which is also somewhat external, if you will. So this is interesting because it can also show us this, well, big divide between what's happening inside and what's outside. Perhaps also in connection with what's happening between you. This Ten of Swords is showing up, right? So this is such a card where he's telling himself, you know, I lost before I even tried. He may think he's late, that something was squandered in a sense. Although this doesn't mean the end, of course, but rather such a temporary, let's say temporary low point, from which, of course, I think sooner or later he will definitely emerge. So this shows that for the moment, currently, something isn't quite right with him. And this is the first such most dominant thought. But all the while, in the back of his mind, there's what I mentioned earlier, which is that your energy, meaning how he thinks about you, to put it bluntly, is very strong. And the Queen of Wands shows that this energy is still very powerful, so he sees you as, you know, a woman who is very well desired in general. In the meantime, I invite you, if you need a private reading, if you have any question for the cards that you'd like to ask, the link is also in the description, so you can click it. Going back to the Five of Pentacles, which appears in the 4th position, well, we see some kind of lack here. So this is exactly what I was talking about earlier, that somewhere in all of this, I see some practical thing that he lost. So maybe, I don't know, something happened at work or generally, I don't know, at some meeting of yours or in messages, but it's this kind of feeling like, you know, for example, I don't know, it's even hard to explain with an example, but, well, he kind of perceives something that in practice, speaking about money, about material matters, isn't completely great for him at this moment. Yes, that's how I see it. Well, because the Five of Pentacles is a card of somewhere standing outside under a window, and a bit of that feeling of, damn, eavesdropping at the door of some warm home, so some lack appears here, some conviction that, you know, that he didn't have enough to offer or wasn't in the right place, couldn't give what was needed. It doesn't only concern money or external stability, but a sense of self-worth. So the Five of Pentacles speaks of someone who looks at himself, well, and sees shortcomings, and then looks at you and sees a woman who could manage even without him. This is what I have the impression the whole time, that this is particularly about material matters, because here we constantly have a lot of such things precisely about logical, practical, and not emotional matters. There are emotions within him. There's quite this perception of you as a woman who is very desirable, but somewhere in practice, you know, either I don't know, he lives too far away, for example, or he doesn't have money to, to buy you a flower, or, well, as I'm saying, he lives too far away, so it's like, damn, something he can't deal with currently, or I don't know, he has too little time because of work, or, well, something like that. Damn, something material, practical. And this doesn't have to be shallow at all, in the sense that he considers it quite a serious thing and doesn't feel that it's as trivial as it might seem. And about that rose, I'm joking, of course, right? But it's something of this type. Like, he feels that there's something he can't fully do, can't afford. So it's, well, weak. And this is such a lack that he senses, right? Which the Five of Pentacles shows. But the 2 is in the 5th position in the question about his awareness, whether he's aware that this might be just his fear, and an interpretation that's quite wrong. And here, the 2 of Wands is a card that shows a moment of suspension between two narratives. On one side, the 5 of denarii still stands, meaning lack, inferiority, and such being out of place. But on the other side, a thought appears. What if this is just a point of view? What if she sees it differently? What if she perceives me from a completely different side? Well, this is probably that perhaps this thought that's slowly entering his mind, because the 2 of Wands shows that it's such a card before action, that he's standing somewhere, they're holding this globe, and looking, thinking, meaning he hasn't moved yet, he's still standing and looking at the horizon, but he already has some thought. Perhaps the contact between you is creating exactly this kind of narrative, that it's changing in his head, right? He's starting to think that maybe this isn't the problem at all. Maybe there are other problems, or maybe there are no problems at all. That's also possible. In any case, he's beginning to perceive these relationships differently, or he's starting to notice more that maybe the problem is slightly different things than he thought before. And this feeling of lack, or maybe fatigue, or exhaustion is starting to, so to speak, diminish in this case. Which actually could come with the King of Swords, right? Because he thinks more logically, so this would be quite consistent here. And finally, the 3 of Swords. And this is, damn, a very strong card, but here it's not really that bad. It's some kind of necessary break that he's simultaneously afraid of and also needs. So it's possible that his move forward won't be hope or courage, but a confrontation with the pain he's avoiding. I have this feeling that there's an old wound here. Maybe he experienced something, or you experienced something like that, and that's exactly where what's currently happening comes from, right? So what I said earlier, but the 3 of Swords is the first moment of true honesty with himself that somewhat changes the perspective. Yes, more dramatically, because I mentioned that the 2 of Wands shows us things are changing a bit, but that's just the beginning, and the 3 of Swords is that moment when it will actually happen. It will hurt a bit for a moment, but then thanks to that, it will be clearer, more obvious, and generally seems better, speaking in general terms. So his current thought, his last thought about you, well, is generally that somewhere you're lack in connection with something, I don't know if it's, well, something practical, right? So I'm talking about something practical, material, but this is starting to change. This is starting to change, and that's very cool, except that such a culminating point will come along with some small disappointment or pain for this relationship. Well, it won't be a breakup or the end, of course, but rather just a small, pinprick that will stick into him. However, from that moment on, he'll better understand the situation and perhaps will realize that the perspective he has is a bit wrong, and he should look in a slightly different direction, especially regarding what you expect from him, because looking at the Queen of Wands, he is interested, he desires this relationship, only something is bothering him somewhere in the back. Not in the back of his head, there's quite a big mess it seems, and that's what's getting in his way the most here. So that's it. If you need a private reading, feel free to reach out. In the meantime, thank you, and I wish you a wonderful day and all the best. Talk to you later. Hey,